So today I want to give you a little bit more about paragraphs. In general, your paragraph in an essay is going to have three basic functions, three things that it has to do. The first thing is it has to make a claim or an assertion of some kind. The second thing that it has to do is it has to support that claim. It has to develop that claim, support that assertion, evidence, reasons, explanations, examples. And then the third thing that a paragraph has to do is it has to connect to the rest of the argument. Whatever the essay is that you're writing, whatever the argument you're making in that essay, each paragraph has to connect to the rest of the essay and back to the thesis statement by reiterating key terms, for example, or by directly connecting back to the claims that you're making in your thesis statement. So these are the three things that a paragraph has to do. What I'm going to try and do today is give you a different way to think about this process. And I'm going to start by talking about the kinds of questions you should be asking in general about a paragraph. The questions that I'm going to suggest you ask for every paragraph in your essay are going to help you make sure that a paragraph does what it's supposed to do. Those three things that it's supposed to do. And the two questions I'm going to suggest are very simple. The first question that every paragraph in your essay should answer is, what do I think? And the second question is, why do I think that? And that's really it. Those are the general questions that every paragraph needs to answer. So if you are writing a review, for example, the generic qualities of the review as a kind of writing, as a genre of writing, the question that a review's thesis answers is this a good work of art, and why or why not? If you're reviewing a cell phone, for example, when we're looking at the aesthetic qualities of the phone, the practical qualities of a phone, I'm talking cell phones or smartphones here, what are some of the things that make a good cell phone or smartphone? So you have this standard that's already set. And the question is, how well does this particular phone fulfill those standards? Most of those standards are going to be aesthetic. Some of them are going to be practical, although the practical and the aesthetic are not as different as you might suppose, or you might initially suppose. So if you were going to talk about the size of the cell phone, I think the size of the cell phone is maybe too big or too small. Maybe it fits awkwardly in the hand. Maybe your thumbs, you can't, do something with one finger, or you can't hold it. If you have big hands, you can't hold it well in your hands to text or whatever. All of those things. Notice what I just did there. I gave what I think it's not a very good phone because, well, it's uncomfortable in my hand, and maybe it's too small for me to do it, or too big for me to do it with only, to text in only one hand. Maybe it feels awkward in my pocket. So these are the reasons that you're giving for why you think what you think. Those are the two big questions that every one of your paragraphs should answer. What do I think, and why do I think it? Now apply the same logic to a rhetorical analysis, or something like a rhetorical analysis or a research essay, right? The rhetorical analysis, the question that you're answering in every rhetorical analysis is, what's the argument? What am I being persuaded of, and how am I being persuaded of it? That's what your thesis has to answer when you're writing a rhetorical analysis. On the paragraph level, so if you're getting into the body of your essay and you're looking at a paragraph in your essay, that paragraph is going to have to be analytical. So you're going to have to look at the language, the rhetorical strategies, and you're going to have to express how a particular rhetorical strategy helps forward whatever argument is being made. So in your thesis statement, if I'm doing a rhetorical analysis of, let's say I'm doing a rhetorical analysis of that scene from Guardians of the Galaxy. Guardians of the Galaxy 2. The scene where Yondu, the dude with the fin, basically just kills everybody on the ship with his magic arrow. Essentially, one of the arguments here is that mass murder isn't such a bad thing if you're mass murdering the right kinds of people. But how does he accomplish this? How does he get us to disconnect from what would be a normal moral reaction to accepting that this is an act of redemption on this guy's part? This guy in enacting, doing or engaging in an act of mass murder that this character is redeeming himself somehow. As we watch this scene of Yondu using his little magic arrow to, kill everybody on his ship, what are some ways that the director convinces us that Yondu's not a bad guy anymore? This is he wants to present an act of mass murder as an act of redemption. That would be my overarching thesis, right? What does he want to persuade you of? He wants to persuade you that an act of mass murder is an act of redemption that makes this guy that is part of this guy's transformation into a hero, this bad guy's transformation into a hero, right? How does he do it? Well, first off, it's who gets to die. So I could have a whole paragraph about who gets to die. The first way that he does this is by making sure that he's killing people who are bad. So the one guy who's allowed to survive is Kraglin, right? He's the one character left alive who displayed the virtue of loyalty. And so having this virtue, we want him to be good. We want virtuous characters, even only superficially virtuous characters, or characters who are virtuous in a limited sense. We want them to be good guys. So notice what I've done there, right? I made my claim of my assertion in my paragraph, and then I'm going through and trying to analyze what happens in order to explain why I think what I think. So I've said what I think, and now I'm trying to find evidence and reasons to explain why I think what I think, which is the two questions that you're supposed to answer for every paragraph in any essay. For just a second, all the other characters who die in this. So we have Kraglin, who survives, and of course we have Rocket and Groot, and they're both, cute and adorable or whatever. But all of the other characters, just look at them. Look for a second at the way that they look. All of the other characters that die in this, they are uglier. They are both uglier in visually and uglier in their personalities. They were disloyal. They're unvirtuous. These are the people who in the first movie we were told tried to eat, the human because they ain't never had Terran before. So that's one of the ways that he does this. My next paragraph might be about the use of music, right? Now I could go on with that whole thing and talk about this being a fallacy, right? These are not well fleshed out characters or something like that. That could be another thing that I say. But he also uses the music. So that'd be another assertion on my part of how he does this. The music is upbeat. It's fun. Come here, be close to your mind, kind of mind. So big and so strong. Come a little bit closer. Another way that he does this is the ridiculousness of the entire scene. It's absurd. And then I have to go through and analyze the scene to illustrate that it's an absurd scene. The looks of the characters, the way that they run in foolish ways, the quick cuts between laughter, right? Versus the people dying. All of those kind of silly faces that they make while they're dying. In all of these ways, James Gunn persuades his audience to see an act of mass murder as an act of heroic redemption, which brings me back to my main argument, right? Which is what rhetorical analyses do. They answer the question, what is the argument and how is it made? So let's go ahead and look at an example. So I'm a Latter-day Saint. As many of you know, I'm a devout Latter-day Saint. And one of the things that often happens to me, it happened more when I was young than it happens now, but it still happens occasionally, is that my church is called a cult by people who disagree with it, right? And when I was young, I used to get all kinds of upset about this, but as I got older and I got more interested in language and began studying language and went on to my PhD and all that, I studied rhetoric, which helped me to understand that really when people use the term cult to dismiss my religion, I mean, basically the word cult, according to Hugh Rawson, is just an organized group of people, religious or not, with whom you disagree. And so basically, by using the word cult, all you're saying is, I don't like you very much. Sometimes this term was used offensively, sometimes it wasn't. But I realized that I shouldn't get offended by this term, partially because the people who use it are just showing their bias, but partially because if you actually look at what the word cult means, denotative, not connotative, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is a cult, just like every other religion in the world, just like almost every other organization in the world. Here I've got an example of what it might look like to take these ideas that I've been expressing and actually write them into paragraphs. So the first one is what we would call a point last paragraph. Actually, I think both of these are point last paragraphs. Basically, there are two kinds of paragraph. You can have your main point or your main assertion towards the beginning or towards the end. Toward the beginning, everything has to substantiate that. If it's toward the end, everything's building up to that. So both of these look like they are point last paragraphs, and I just wrote them based on what I was just saying, right? So you have the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, among others, has often been dismissed, demonized, as a cult by appealing to the relatively recent pejorative connotations of that term, connotations that only developed in the mid-20th century. But notice what I'm doing here, right? So I've got my paragraphs. I've got a claim. It's okay to be part of a cult because the cults you want to avoid are the false ones, and an associated claim, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints just happens to be a true cult. And then I've got down here my claim as well. Religion isn't the problem, pseudo-religion is. And the biggest problem is, how do you tell the difference? And this is an ongoing struggle, one that I would suggest is easier for science than it is for religion, and far less complicating. Everything else in this paragraph is designed to support this assertion that I'm making. In fact, this claim that it's easier probably should be its own paragraph, but I'm not going to worry about that for the moment. I'm a good enough writer, I could probably get away with that. And remember, for everything, every rule that I have here, there's always a way to kind of break. They're not rules, they're principles. So anyway, so essentially what I'm trying to do here is to communicate the fact in paragraph 1 that the use of the term cult is pejorative and subjective, and it is not objective. It's an insult, not an argument. And then in the second paragraph, I am trying to convey essentially the fact that in the same way that you don't dismiss all science because of the existence of pseudoscience, you shouldn't just dismiss all religion because there might be pseudo-religions out there. And of course, I'm not going into how we would define pseudo-religion. That would be a different paragraph. But what I'm trying to do here is simply give you an example of what it might look like to answer the kinds of questions that I'm telling you your paragraphs need to answer. Remember that first question. What do I think? In the first paragraph, I think that essentially the use of the term cult is subjective, it's arbitrary, and it's just an insult. It's not actually saying anything objective. It's not communicating any objective facts. In the second paragraph, to answer the question, what do I think? I think that in the same way, you shouldn't dismiss science outright just because there is the existence of pseudosciences. You also shouldn't dismiss religion just because there are pseudo-religions or false religions. And in both of these paragraphs, you find that claim that I'm making or that assertion that I'm making, the answer to that question, what do I think, at the end of the paragraph. The rest of each of these paragraphs is designed to develop and substantiate that claim. And because these are point last paragraphs, they're designed to develop and substantiate that claim while working up towards the claim as the climax of the paragraph. In this paragraph, I've pointed out here, there are a variety of ways to support a claim. So if this is my claim, okay, so once you've made a claim, you now have to support it. So if the claim answers that first question, what do I think? It's the support that you use that answers the second question, why do I think that? And there are a lot of different ways that you can support a claim. I mean, look at the ones that I've got here. You can use you can quote from an authority. You can use personal experience. You can paraphrase an authority or somebody else's quote. You can analyze. You can define things. You can redefine things. You can use imagery. You can make an invitation or what's called a call to action. In this second one, I spent a lot of time using comparison. So in my second paragraph, I am comparing religion to science and arguing, or asserting rather at this point, because I haven't really gotten deep into the argument here yet. This would be a much larger argument that I would have to make. But in this paragraph, what I'm asserting is that there is a similarity between science and religion, in that you shouldn't dismiss all science just because there's pseudoscience. You also shouldn't dismiss all religion just because there might be things that you could call pseudo-religions. And so that's a comparison. That's an example of how you do that. And what I'm doing here is I'm appealing to something called the topoi. You can look that up, TPOI, or the commonplaces. These are the topoi of invention, or the commonplaces of invention. But basically, these are just ways to defend an argument. Once you've asserted something, you now have to develop it. If you go to this website called the Silva Rhetoricae, which was developed by a guy that I worked with at Brigham Young University, a guy named Gideon Burton, he has a great list of all of the topics or topoi of invention: definition, division, comparison, relationship, circumstances, testimony, notation. You can talk about justice, the good, the unworthy, the advantageous or disadvantageous, virtue and vice. So there's lots of ways that the ancients tried to develop their arguments. And that's basically what we're talking about here. Once you've answered that question, what do I think? You got to have a reason for why you think what you think. And that's the rest of the paragraph. What the rest of the paragraph is supposed to do is develop that idea and then support it. Reasons, evidence. And again, as we've talked about before, when you can look at my video on the STAR criteria, your evidence has to be sufficient. So that means there has to be enough of it. It has to be typical. That means that it's acceptable to your audience. It has to be accurate, which means it can be, you can test the validity of these things. You can look it up on your own, which is why I have, hyperlinks in here. And then it has to be relevant. You can't just go off on tangents. So again, notice what we're looking at here. Beginnings and endings. That's where you're going to find your main assertion. But the goal to keep in mind here is that you have two questions. What do I think? And I'm answering that. And why do I think it? And I'm answering that. So this is just another way to approach crafting paragraphs. But the key thing to take away here is, what are the questions that you should ask going into constructing a paragraph? And those questions are the two questions I just gave you at the beginning of the video. The first one, what am I saying? What do I believe? What do I think about whatever topic I'm talking about? And the second question that you need to answer is why. Why do I believe what I believe? Why do I think what I think? Those two questions need to be answered by every paragraph that you write in an essay. And that's basically it, okay? So as you either are constructing your essay paragraphs, or if you come into your essay paragraphs in revision and you see a problematic paragraph, or if you're coming in doing a revision and you come across a problematic paragraph, ask those questions. If the paragraph you're either composing or revising does not answer both of those questions sufficiently, typically, accurately, and with relevant reasons and evidence, you got to revise it. Hope you found this helpful. Talk to you again another time. Bye.